Hello, welcome to another First Chapter Friday. Our story today, very popular at our school. It is My Life with the Walter Boys by Ali Novak. This is written, originally she started writing it when she was only 15, so she is a very young author. It's her debut novel, and I'm going to be reading the prologue, which is very short, and the first chapter, which is pretty long, and you will right away see differences between the book and the TV series if you've seen that, like I have. And I'm pretty sure you're going to enjoy this version. So maybe after you've seen the show, you want more, come check out the book. All right, anyways, let's get going. Prologue. I never felt bad for Romeo and Juliet. Don't get me wrong, the play's a classic, and Shakespeare was by all means a literary genius. But I just don't understand how two people who barely knew each other could give up their lives so willingly. It was for love, people argue, true everlasting love. But in my opinion, that's a load of garbage. Love takes more than a couple days, and a secret shotgun marriage should develop into something worth dying for. I'll admit, Romeo and Juliet were passionate, but their passion was so intense, so destructive, it got them killed. I mean, the entire play is driven by their impulsive decisions. Don't believe me? Take Juliet, for example. What girl's first thought would be to marry the son of her father's mortal enemy after she catches him spying outside her bedroom window? Not mine, that's for sure. So that's really why they lost my sympathy vote. There was no preparation, or even thinking. For that matter, they just did, regardless of the consequences. When you don't plan ahead, things get messy. And after what happened 3 months ago, after my life was completely thrown off course, a messy love life was the last thing I needed. Chapter 1. I didn't own a single pair of jeans. Strange, I know, because what 16-year-old girl doesn't have at least one pair? Maybe with a rip in the knee, or a heart doodled across the thigh in Sharpie? It wasn't that I disliked the way they looked, and it had nothing to do with the fact that my mother had been a fashion designer, especially considering she used jeans in her collections all the time. But I was a firm believer in the phrase, dress to impress, and today I was going to need to make an impression. "Jackie!" I heard Catherine call from somewhere inside the apartment. "The taxi's here!" "Just a minute." I scooped a piece of paper off my desk. "Laptop, charger, mouse," I muttered, reading off the rest of the checklist. Opening my satchel, I searched for my possessions to make sure they were safely tucked inside. Check, check, and check, I whispered when my fingers brushed against all 3 items. With a bright red pen, I marked an X next to each of them on my list. There was a knock on my bedroom door. "You ready, honey?" Catherine asked, poking her head inside. She was a tall woman in her late 40s, with golden hair that was cut into a mom bob and starting to gray. "I think so," I told her, but my voice cracked, revealing otherwise. My gaze snapped down to my feet because I didn't want to see the look in her eyes, the sympathetic one that I'd seen on everyone's faces since the funeral. "I'll give you a moment," I heard her say. When the door clicked shut, I smoothed down my skirt as I glanced in the mirror. My long, dark curls were straightened and tied back with a blue ribbon like always. Not a single strand out of place. The collar on my blouse was crooked, and I fidgeted with it until my reflection was seamless. I pursed my lips in annoyance at the purple circles under my eyes, but there was nothing I could do to fix the lack of sleep that was causing them. Sighing, I took one last look around my room. Even though my entire checklist was crossed off, I didn't know when I would be returning, and I didn't want to forget anything important. The space was strangely empty since most of my possessions were on a moving truck, bound for Colorado. It had taken me a week to pack it all, but Catherine helped me with the huge task. Clothing had filled most of the boxes, but there were also my collections of Shakespeare plays and teacups that my sister Lucy and I had collected from every country we'd visited. As I glanced around, I knew I was stalling. With my organizational skills, there was just no way I'd forget anything. The real issue was that I didn't want to leave New York, not one bit. But I didn't have a say in the matter, so with reluctance, I grabbed my carry-on. Catherine was waiting for me out in the hall, one small suitcase sitting at her feet. "Have everything?" she asked, and I nodded my head. "All right, let's get going then." She led the way through the living room and toward the front door, and I trailed slowly behind her, running my hand over the furniture in an attempt to memorize every last detail of my home. It was hard, which was strange considering I'd lived here my entire life. The white sheets thrown over the furniture to prevent dust from frosting the fabric were like solid walls, holding my recollections at bay. We stepped out of the apartment in silence, and Catherine paused to lock the door. "Would you like to look after the key?" she asked. I had my own set tucked in my suitcase, but I reached out and took the small silver piece of metal from her hands. Unfastening my mother's locket, I let the key slip down the delicate chain so it could rest against my chest, right next to my heart. We sat on the plane in silence. I was trying hard to forget that I was currently moving farther and farther away from my home, and I refused to let myself cry. For the first month after the accident, I never left my bed. Then came the day where I miraculously pulled myself out from underneath my comforter and I got dressed. Since then, I promised myself that I would be strong and composed. I didn't want to go back to the weak, hollow person I'd become, and it wasn't going to change now. Instead, I focused my attention on Catherine as she clenched and unclenched the armrest, her knuckles going white each time she did. I only knew a few things about the woman sitting next to me. First was that she was my mother's childhood friend. They grew up in New York and they attended Hawks boarding school together, the same school that my sister and I had been enrolled in. Back then, she was known as Catherine Green, which brought me to the second thing that I knew about her. During college, she met George Walter. The two married and moved to Colorado to start a horse ranch, George's lifelong dream. Finally, the third and most noteworthy piece of information that I knew about Catherine: she was my new guardian. Apparently, I'd met her when I was little, but it was so long ago I couldn't remember. Catherine Walter was a complete stranger to me. "Afraid of flying?" I asked, as she let out a deep breath. Honestly, the woman looked like she was going to be sick. "No, but to be completely truthful, I am a bit nervous about, taking you home," she said. I felt my shoulders tense up. What was she afraid was going to happen? That I'd go off the deep end? I could assure her that wasn't going to happen, not if I wanted to get into Princeton. Uncle Richard must have said something to her, something about me not being okay, even though I was perfectly fine. Catherine caught my look and quickly added, "Oh, no, honey, not because of you. I know you're a good kid." "Then why?" Catherine's smile was sympathetic. "Jackie, honey, did I ever tell you that I have 12 kids?" No, I thought, as my mouth dropped open. That definitely wasn't mentioned. When he decided I was moving to Colorado, Uncle Richard did say something about Catherine having kids. But 12? He'd conveniently left that little detail out. 12 kids. Catherine's household must be stuck permanently in a state of chaos. Why would anyone even want to have 12 children? I could feel the tiny wings of panic fluttering inside my chest. Stop overreacting, I told myself. After taking a few deep breaths in through the nose, out through the mouth, I pulled out a notebook and pen. I needed to find out as much as I could about the family I was going to live with, so that I could be prepared. Sitting up in my seat, I asked Catherine to tell me about her kids, and she agreed enthusiastically. "My oldest is Will," she began, and I started writing. The Walter boys. Will is 21. He is in his final semester at the local community college and is engaged to his high school sweetheart. Cole is 17. He is a senior in high school and a talented auto mechanic. Danny is 17. He is also a senior in high school and the president of the drama club. He is Cole's fraternal twin. Isaac is 16. He is a junior in high school and is obsessed with girls. He is Catherine's nephew. Alex is 16. He is a sophomore in high school and plays way too many video games. Lee is 15. He is a sophomore in high school and a skater. He is also Catherine's nephew. Nathan is 14. He is a freshman in high school and a musician. Jack and Jordan are 12. They're in 7th grade and twins. They believe that they will be the next Steven Spielberg and always have a video camera with them. Parker is 9. He is in 4th grade. He looks innocent, but he loves tackle football. Zach and Benny are 5 and in kindergarten. They are twins and little monsters with potty mouths. I looked over at what I wrote, and my stomach dropped. This was a joke, right? Catherine didn't have 12 kids. 12 boys? I knew nothing, absolutely nothing about the male species. I went to a private school for girls. How was I ever going to survive living in a house full of boys? Didn't they speak their own language or something? As soon as the plane landed, Uncle Richard was going to hear an earful from me. Knowing him, he was probably wrapped up in an important board meeting, and he probably wouldn't be able to take my call, but I couldn't believe him. Not only was he pawning me off on some woman I didn't know, but he was also dumping me with a pack of boys. He said he was doing something that was best for me, especially since he was never home. But over the past 3 months, I've gotten the feeling he didn't feel comfortable being a parent. Richard wasn't my real uncle, but I'd known him since I was a little girl. He was my dad's college roommate, and after graduating, they'd become business partners. Every year on my birthday, he would bring me a bag of my favorite jelly beans and a card with $50 in it. In January, Richard became my guardian, and to make the situation more bearable for me, he moved into the penthouse on Upper East Side where my family lived. At first it was weird with him in the house, but he kept to himself in the spare bedroom, and soon we fell into a comfortable routine. Normally I only saw him at breakfast, since he always worked late into the night, but last week all that changed. When I came home from school, the dinner table was set with what must have been his best attempt at a home-cooked meal. Then he told me that I was moving to Colorado. "I don't get why you're making me leave," I told him after 10 minutes of arguing. "I explained this already, Jackie," he said, his face pained as if the decision was ripping him away from his only home he'd ever known, and not me. "Your school therapist is worried about you. She called today because she doesn't think you're coping well." "First of all, I never wanted to see that therapist," I argued, slamming my fork on the table. "Secondly, how can she even suggest I'm not coping well? My grades are excellent, if not better than the first semester." "You've done a fine job in school, Jackie," he said. I could hear the but coming. "However, she thinks you're throwing yourself into your work as a way to avoid facing your problems." My only problem is that she has no clue who I am. Come on, Uncle Richard. You know me. I've always been studious and hardworking. That's what it means to be a Howard.
Jackie, you've joined 3 new clubs since the start of the semester. Don't you think you're spreading yourself a bit thin?
Did you know Sarah Yolden received a scholarship to go study an endangered species of planets in Brazil over the summer? I asked instead.
No, but
she got to publish her findings in a science magazine. She's also first chair for violin and got to perform in Carnegie Hall. How am I supposed to compete with that? I can't just have good grades if I want to get into Princeton. I told him coolly. My application needs to be impressive, and I'm building it up.
And I understand that, but I also think a change of scenery might be beneficial for you. The Walters are wonderful people and are happy to take you in.
A change of scenery is relaxing on a beach for a week, I exclaimed, rocketing out of my chair. Leaning over the table, I glared at Uncle Richard. This is cruel. You're sending me across the country, he sighed.
I know you don't understand right now, Jackie, but I promise you this will be a good thing. You'll see.
So far, I didn't understand. The closer we got to Colorado, the more nervous I became. And no matter how many times I told myself things would be fine, I didn't believe it. I chewed my lip until it was raw, worrying over how difficult it would be for me to fit into the Walters' lives. When the plane landed, Catherine and I made our way through the airport to find her husband. Now, I told the kids last week that you're moving in, so they know you're coming, she chattered as we pushed through the crowds. I have a room for you as well, but I haven't been able to clean it out yet. So, oh, George, over here! Catherine jumped up and down, waving to a tall man in his early 50s. I could tell Mr. Walter was a few years older than his wife, because most of his hair and scruff were completely gray, and age lines were starting to streak across his forehead. He was wearing a red and black flannel shirt with jeans and heavy work boots and a cowboy hat. When we reached him, he pulled Catherine into a hug and stroked her hair. It reminded me of my parents, and I cringed and I turned away.
I missed you,
he told her. She pecked him on the cheek. I missed you too. Pulling away, she turned to me. George, dear, she said, taking his hand. This is Jackie Howard. Jackie, this is my husband. George looked uncomfortable as he sized me up. After all, how exactly do you greet someone who has just lost her entire family? Nice to meet you? We're happy to have you? Instead, George held out his free hand for me to grasp and muttered a quick hello. Then he turned back to Catherine.
Let's get the luggage and go home.
Once all of my suitcases were packed into the bed of the truck, I climbed into the back seat and dug my phone out of my jacket. George and Catherine were chattering quietly about the flight, so I put on my headphones, not wanting to hear any more of their conversation. As we drove farther away from the city and deeper into the country, I became more upset. We were surrounded by plains that stretched for miles, and without the tall, proud buildings of New York City, I felt exposed. Colorado was beautiful, but how was I going to ever live here? Finally, after what seemed like hours, the truck pulled into a gravel road. In the distance, I could see the house on top of a hill, but just barely. Was all of this land really theirs? When we got to the top, I realized that it wasn't a single house. It looked more like 3 homes put together. I guess you need a lot of space for 12 boys. The grass desperately needed to be mowed, and the wooden front porch could have used a paint job. The lawn was covered in toys, probably the younger boys' handiwork. George hit one of those clickery thingies that was clipped onto the visor, and the garage door started to open. A bike fell over, followed by a few more toys, which blocked the truck's way into the parking spot.
"How many times do we need to tell them to clean up after themselves?" George grumbled to himself.
"Don't worry, dear, I'm on it," Catherine said as she unbuckled her seatbelt and slid out of the car. I watched as she moved the mess so her husband could pull in. When the car was finally parked, George let the engine die and we sat in the dim silence. Then he turned around in the front seat next to me.
"You ready, Jackie?"
he asked. He looked me over and frowned.
"You're looking kind of pale."
Of course I look pale. I had just flown halfway across the country with a woman I didn't know because my family was gone. On top of that, I was going to have to live with 12 kids, all of whom were boys. This wasn't exactly a top 10 day for me. "I'm fine," I said, muttering my automatic response. "Just a little nervous, I guess."
"Well, the best piece of advice I can give you about my boys," he began while unbuckling his seatbelt, "is that their barks are worse than their bites. Don't let them scare you."
How was that supposed to be reassuring? George was watching me, so I nodded my head. Thanks." He gave me a small nod and then got out of the car, leaving me alone to compose myself. As I stared out the windshield, quick images started to flash before my eyes, like the pages of a flip book. My parents in the front seat of our car teasing one another. My sister in the back seat singing along with the radio. The flicker of another car, and the wheel spinning out of control. Then twisted metal. Red. It was the nightmare that had been keeping me up since the day my family died. Now apparently it was here to haunt me during the daylight hours as well. "Stop!" I screamed to myself and squeezed my eyes shut. "Just stop thinking about it." Gritting my teeth together, I opened the door and I hopped out of the car. "Jackie!" Catherine called. Her voice drifted through an open door at the back of the garage, which led to what must have been the backyard. Slinging my carry-on over my shoulder, I emerged into the sunlight. At first, the only thing I saw was her standing on a pool deck, waving at me as the sun glared into my eyes. But then I saw them in the water. They were splashing and goofing around, a shirtless bunch of gorgeous guys. "Come here, honey," Catherine said, so I had no other choice but to go join her on the deck. I climbed up the wooden steps, hoping my clothes weren't rumpled from flight, and unconsciously moved my hand up to smooth out my hair. Catherine was smiling at me as two young boys stood next to her, clinging to her pants. Must be the youngest set of twins, I decided, before turning my face to the rest of the group. Much to my discomfort, everyone was staring at me. "Boys," began Catherine, breaking the silence, "this is Jackie Howard, the family friend your father told you about. She'll be staying with us for some time, and while she's here, I want all of you to do your best to make her feel at home." That seemed like the opposite of what they wanted. All the boys were staring at me like I was a foreigner invading their own personal country. The best thing to do is make peace, I told myself. I slowly raised my hand and I waved. "Hi, guys, I'm Jackie." One of the older boys swam forward and pulled himself out of the pool, making the muscles of his tanned arms bulge. A spray of water flew in all directions as he flicked his bangs out of his eyes, and then he ran a hand through his sun-bleached blonde hair, combing it back into golden white streaks. The boy's red swim trunks hung dangerously low, flirting between inappropriate and just enough room for imagination. I took one look at him and my heart fluttered. But I quickly pushed the stirring feeling away. "What is wrong with you, Jackie?" His gaze flickered over me casually and the water droplets caught in his eyelashes sparkled in the sunlight. He turned to his father.
"Where's she gonna stay?" he questioned, as if I weren't there. "Cole," George responded in a voice meant to reprimand his son, "don't be so rude. Jackie is our guest." Cole shrugged. "What? We're not running a hotel here. I, for one, am not sharing a room."
"I don't want to share one either," another boy complained. "Me either," another one added. Before a chorus of complaints rang out, George held up his hands.
"No one's going to have to share a room or give up their room," he said. "Jackie will have an entirely new room."
"New room?" Cole asked as he crossed his arms over his bare chest. "Where's that?" Catherine shot him a look. "The studio." "But Auntie Kathy," one of the other boys started to say. "You did have a bed moved in there while I was gone, right, George?" she asked, cutting off one of her nephews.
"Of course. Not all the supplies were moved out, but it will have to do in the meantime," he told his wife.
Then he turned to Cole and gave him a look that said, "Knock it off."
"You can help Jackie move her things," he said. "No complaining."
Cole turned back to me, his gaze unnerving. My skin blazed like a bad sunburn where his eyes touched my body and where they lingered a little too long on my chest. I crossed my arms in discomfort. After a few tense seconds, he shrugged.
"No problem, Dad."
Cole cocked his head and offered me a smirk that said, "I know I'm hot." Even with my limited knowledge of boys, a twisting in my stomach told me that this one in particular was going to be a problem. Maybe if I could learn to deal with him, the rest of them wouldn't be as bad. I risked a quick glance at the other boys, and my shoulders slumped. The scowls plastered across most of their faces were not a good sign. They seemed to want me here as little as I wanted to be here. Catherine and George disappeared into the house, leaving me to the wolves. I waited awkwardly on the deck for Cole to help me with my luggage. He was taking his time, slowly drying off with the towel that had been flung over one of the many pool chairs. I could feel everyone watching me, so I kept my eyes focused on one of the swirly knots on the wooden deck. The longer Cole took, the more intimidating the staring became, so I decided to wait for him in the garage. "Hey, wait!" someone called as I turned to leave. The screen door slid open and another boy stepped out of the house. He was the tallest of them all, and probably the oldest too. His golden hair was pulled back into a short ponytail, and a few strands that weren't held back had curled up around his ears. His strong jawline, thick chin, and long, straight nose made the glasses he wore look small compared to the rest of his face. His forearms were toned, and his hands looked rough, most likely from years of working on the ranch.
"Mom said I needed to introduce myself."
He crossed the deck in 3 long strides, and he held out his hand for me to shake.
"Hi, I'm Will."
"Jackie," I said, slipping my hand into his. Will smiled at me, and his tight grip crushed my fingers like his father's had.
"So you'll be staying here for a while, I just heard," he said, jabbing a finger over his shoulder and gesturing at the house.
"Yes, it seems so."
"Cool. I don't actually live here anymore since I'm in college, so you probably won't see me much, but if you ever need anything, just let me know, okay?"
By now, all the boys had climbed out of the pool to dry themselves off, and someone snorted at Will's comment. I did my best to ignore it. "I'll make sure to remember that." Will, on the other hand, did not.
"Are we all playing nicely?" he asked, turning toward his family. When no one responded, he shook his head. "Have you idiots even introduced yourselves yet?" he demanded. "She knows who I am," Cole said. He was sprawled
in one of the plastic lounge chairs, hands tucked casually behind his head. His eyes were closed as he basked in the sun, a smug smile playing on his lips. "Oh, never mind him. He's an A," Will said. "Over here is Danny, the A's twin." Although there was no mistaking that they were brothers, Cole and Danny were far from identical. Danny closely resembled Will, especially in height, but he was much skinnier and his chin was covered in scruff. He looked rougher than Cole, less pretty boy. "That's Isaac, my cousin," continued Will, pointing to a boy who stood out due to his midnight black hair. He had the same facial features as the other boys, but was clearly from other parents. "This is Alex," a younger-looking version of Cole, with a bad farmer's tan, pushed his way to the front of the group. Since getting out of the pool, he had pulled on a baseball cap, and his blonde hair curled up over the edges. I gave him a nervous nod, and he nodded back. "Lee, he's also my cousin. He's Isaac's younger brother." Will gestured to another boy with curly black hair, which desperately needed to be cut. His face was blank, but his dark eyes flashed with anger when I acknowledged him, so I quickly looked away. Next, Will introduced me to Nathan. He was a scrawny teen, but I could tell that when he grew, he would be just as attractive as his older brothers. His sandy hair looked brown since it was wet, and hanging from his neck was a guitar pick on a silver chain. There were Jack and Jordan, the first set of identical twins. They were both wearing the same green swim trunks, which could have made it impossible to tell who they were, except Jack wore glasses. When Will introduced Parker, I realized I wasn't alone. She stepped forward, and I understood why I hadn't realized there was another girl before now. Parker was wearing an orange t-shirt and swim trunks, both heavy with water and clinging to her skin. Her hair was cut to a short bob, nearly as short as some of her brothers. I thought back to the list I made on the plane and remembered that Parker likes tackle football. Maybe that's why I assumed that she was a boy. "Hi, Parker," I said, offering her a big grin. It was nice to know there was another girl in the house. "Hi, Jackie." Parker said my name as if it was something funny, and the smile slipped off my face. She leaned down and whispered something to the two boys that I had yet to meet, the youngest set of twins. A wicked grin crept onto both of their faces. "And finally we have..." But before Will could finish introducing me, the pair shot out from the line of Walters and bulldozed into me like I was a football player. I thought I'd be able to keep my balance, but my knees buckled and I fell back, straight into the pool. I paddled back up into the surface, sputtering and gasping for air. I could hear most of the guys laughing. "Gotcha!" cried one of the twins as he stood at the edge of the pool. He was a cute little kid who still hadn't lost his baby fat. Freckles covered his face, and yellow hair curled all over. "I'm Zach, and that's my twin, Benny." When he pointed next to me, I looked over to see an exact replica of the smiling kid break the surface of the water. "Zach and Benny, what the hell is wrong with you?" Will demanded. "Someone get Jackie a towel." He stuck out a hand to help me up, and soon I was dripping on the side of the pool. It was too early in the spring to be swimming. How were the Walters not freezing? Someone handed me a red Power Ranger towel, and I quickly wrapped it around myself to cover the now see-through white blouse that I was wearing. "I'm really sorry about that," Will said before shooting the youngest twins a glare. "The only thing I'm sorry about is that he gave her a towel," someone said. I whipped around to see which boy it was, but they were all standing together silently, trying to keep the grins off their faces. Taking a deep breath, I turned back to Will. It's fine," I said, my teeth clattering. I'd like to change into something dry.
I can help with that,
Another voice joked. This time, they couldn't contain their laughter.
Isaac!
Will snapped. He glared over my shoulder at his cousin until the boys quieted down, and then he turned back to me. Your bag's inside the car? He asked. Shivering from the cool spring air, I was only able to nod my head.
Okay, I'll start unloading, and someone can show you to your room.
As Will retreated off the deck, I felt myself shrink. My only friend so far had just left me with the enemies. Taking a deep breath of air, I gulped and I turned back around. The Walter boys looked at me, their faces vacant. Then everyone started to grab their towels and clothes lying around on the deck before heading back into the house without another word to me. Only Cole was left. An awkward 30 seconds passed before his mouth jerked up into a half grin.
Are you just going to stare at me, or do you want to go inside?
He asked. Cole was hot. His damp hair had dried in a I had kind of style, but his overconfident attitude made me clam up. I want to go inside, I mumbled quietly.
After you.
He flourished a hand and bowed. Taking a deep breath, I gazed up at my new house, with its yellow shutters and rough additions that must have been added onto the house with each new Walter child. It was nothing like the penthouse back in New York. Throwing one last glance at Cole, I sucked in a deep breath into my lungs and I stepped inside. This might be where I had to live, and I would try to make the best of it, but it would never be my home. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it kind of wet the whistle and made you want to read more and see what other differences there might be. As you heard, there's a different amount of people in the household. It's very clear who is adopted. Later on, you find out that the boys who are the nephews of Catherine, they're actually her brother's kids, and he is out for military duty, and that's why he isn't able to take care of them. There's other differences. Obviously, you heard that Jackie wasn't organizing some sort of party at the beginning. You heard that she is an organized person from how she is taking apart her life in New York and getting ready for the move in Colorado. But there's so many other differences that you get, and I hope that you read it. I loved how you got her inner thoughts. I know the audience had those same type of thoughts watching the show, so it wasn't a big stretch to figure out what Jackie was thinking. But anyways, all that stuff's in there that you get in a book that you won't get from the series. So I do hope you finish it, and you have a great week. I will see you soon, or you'll see me soon. Okay, take care.